The city glittered with wealth that night. Inside the private airport, luxury jets gleamed under bright hangar lights, polished until their silver wings looked like mirrors. Chauffeurs in pressed uniforms carried bags, investors in tailored suits spoke into phones, and pilots moved with quiet precision. Just beyond the glass, the world looked very different. Behind the hangar, where trash bins overflowed and shadows stretched long, a 17-year-old girl curled up on a mattress of cardboard and blankets. Her name was Imani. Her backpack, worn and patched, sat by her side. Inside were the only things she owned: a wrench set, a few tools, and a folded photograph of her late father. Imani had grown used to being invisible. To most of the city, she was just another homeless black girl, someone to avoid, someone to dismiss. But she carried something no one saw. Her hands, small but steady, knew how to breathe life back into machines. She could hear an engine's heartbeat the way musicians heard rhythm. It was her gift, the one thing her father left behind. She often whispered to his photograph when the nights felt colder than usual. "I'm still listening, Daddy. Just like you taught me." Her father, a mechanic, had been pushed out of business when wealthy clients spread lies, choosing bigger shops owned by men who looked different. Racism had stolen his dream and left them in ruins. When he died, the weight of survival fell on her shoulders. She fixed broken bikes, old cars, anything she could trade for food. But no matter how skilled she was, people rarely looked past the dirt on her clothes or the color of her skin. On the other side of the airport, Charles Harrington stood in front of his private jet. Tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed in sharp suits, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who owned not just money, but people's attention. He was a billionaire known for arrogance, famous for calling the poor lazy and unworthy. To Charles, life was simple. There were winners and losers. He had built walls of wealth so high he never had to see the people at the bottom. His jet was his pride, his symbol of untouchable success. And tonight, it was meant to take him across the ocean for a deal worth millions. Investors waited for him. Cameras would be watching. Failure was not an option. But arrogance doesn't stop engines from failing. Just as the crew prepared for takeoff, a loud sputter echoed from the hangar. The sleek machine whined, coughed, and then fell silent. The pilot frowned, tried again, nothing. The engine refused to respond. Panic swept the staff. Engineers rushed forward, voices overlapping. "Check the pressure line, reset the gauge, reroute the circuit." The words blurred in a storm of confusion. Investors watching nearby began to whisper. A delay could cost millions. Charles's jaw tightened as his face flushed with anger. "What do you mean it's not starting?" His voice boomed, cutting through the hangar noise. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? Fix it now." The engineers scrambled, tools clattering against metal, sweat running down their foreheads. But the jet remained silent. Imani, drawn by the commotion, peered from the shadows. She listened closely. The sound of that last sputter had told her everything. It wasn't the pressure line. It wasn't the fuel. She knew just by the rhythm where the fault lay. Her heart pounded. Every part of her wanted to step forward, to speak. But fear rooted her in place. She remembered the way people's eyes slid past her on the streets, how her voice carried no weight. Still, the thought nagged at her. She could fix it. She was sure of it. She took a hesitant step forward, her whisper almost drowned by the noise. "I know what's wrong." No one heard her. She cleared her throat, louder this time. "I know what's wrong with your engine." Heads turned. Engineers froze. Charles swung around, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the girl in tattered clothes. For a moment, silence fell across the hangar. It was the beginning of a collision neither of them could avoid. The night an invisible girl would stand in the path of a man who thought he was untouchable. All eyes in the hangar landed on her. The girl with the torn hoodie, dirt-streaked cheeks and calloused hands. Imani felt the weight of their stares pressing down like chains. Charles's expression shifted from irritation to amusement, his lips curling into a sneer. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Imani swallowed hard, forcing the words out. I can help. I know what's wrong with the engine." Laughter rippled through the engineers. One shook his head. "What is this, a joke?" Another muttered. Imani took a shaky breath and stepped closer. "It's not the pressure line. It's the compressor valve. It's clogged. probably with residue. If you clear it, the airflow will reset and the engine will catch. For a second, silence followed her words. A flicker of recognition crossed the face of one of the mechanics. She had nailed the problem exactly. But before he could speak, Charles burst into laughter. "You?" he said loudly, pointing at her as if she were part of some cruel joke. "A homeless girl from the streets thinks she knows more about jet engines than my trained staff?" Imani's cheeks burned hot. She wanted to shrink back into the shadows, but she clenched her fists instead. "I've fixed engines since I was 10. My father taught me. I know what I'm talking about." Charles's voice rose, booming across the hangar so the investors could hear every word. "Engines since 10? What, bicycles? Old scrap cars you pulled from dumpsters?" His laugh was harsh, meant to slice through her. "You think anyone here takes advice from someone who sleeps in alleys?" Some of the investors chuckled nervously. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the cruelty. But none spoke up. Imani's throat tightened, but she refused to look away. "I know I'm right," she said, softer now but steady. Charles stepped closer, towering over her. "Listen carefully," he hissed. "People like you need to remember your place. You don't belong near jets, near money, near me. Stay in your lane." The words cut deeper than any blade. "Stay in your lane." Imani's breath hitched and she blinked back tears. The engineers shuffled awkwardly, ignoring her as they bent back over their notes and tools. To them, she was nothing more than a distraction. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, a specialist rushed in, summoned by Charles's desperate calls. The man inspected the jet, poked around, and after only a few minutes, he looked up. "Compressor valves clogged. Needs a clean reset." A hush fell. It was exactly what Imani had said. Charles's jaw twitched, but his pride burned hotter than truth. He didn't glance her way, didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he barked, "Well, fix it then!" "Don't just stand there." The specialist set to work. Imani stood frozen, her fists shaking at her sides. She needed him to admit it, to just say the words, "You were right." But they never came. Instead, Charles turned back to his investors, forcing a grin. "See, just a minor hiccup. Nothing worth worrying about." His voice carried, smooth and confident, as if he hadn't just been exposed. Humiliation crashed over Imani. She backed away, her steps heavy. The laughter, the sneers, the words, "Stay in your lane," all clung to her like oil she couldn't wash off. As she slipped out of the hangar, she caught the eye of a woman leaning against the wall. Rosa, a maintenance worker in her 40s, had watched the whole exchange silently. Now she gave Imani a small, knowing nod. "You were right," Rosa murmured when their paths crossed. Her voice was low but firm. "Don't let him take your gift away." Imani stared at her, unsure whether to believe it. Then she turned and walked into the night, her shoulders heavy with shame. The voices of mockery followed her long after the hangar lights disappeared behind her. The night was quiet, but inside Imani's chest, chaos raged. She walked for miles without noticing where her feet were taking her, until finally she pushed open the rusted door of the garage she called home. The space smelled of old oil and damp concrete. Her mattress, thin and ragged, lay in the corner. She dropped her backpack beside it and sat down, her body trembling. The image of Charles's sneer replayed over and over, each word like a knife reopening the wound. "Stay in your lane." Her hands curled into fists. She pressed them against her forehead, trying to block out the sound. She had been right. She knew she had been right, yet being right hadn't mattered. No one listened, no one cared. She whispered into the silence, her voice shaking. "What's the point of knowing anything if nobody will ever believe me?" Her gaze drifted to the faded photograph pinned to the wall. Her father stood in it, grease on his hands, a proud smile on his face. She remembered the sound of his laugh, the warmth in his eyes when he handed her her first wrench. "Your hands can build more than machines, baby," he used to tell her. "They can build respect." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Respect? Not in this world, Daddy. Not for me." She leaned back against the cold wall, eyes filling with tears. Memories of her father's shop came flooding back, the way wealthy clients had praised his work, only to later whisper lies that pushed him out of business. She had seen the toll it took on him, the way he carried the weight of injustice until it crushed him. Now she carried it too. "Maybe I'll always be invisible," she muttered. The tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't bother wiping them away. For a long time, she sat in silence, listening to the faint drip of water leaking from a pipe above. Alone, she felt smaller than she ever had. Across the city, Charles Harrington raised a glass of champagne at a private dinner. His investors laughed at his jokes, but beneath the polished smile, he felt an unease he couldn't shake. The girl's words had burrowed into his mind. She had called the problem before his engineers, and the specialist had confirmed it. For a split second in front of everyone, Charles had looked foolish. He hated that feeling. He told himself it didn't matter. She was a nobody, a child, a homeless girl who would never set foot in his world again. He had power, money, influence. What could her truth mean against all that? But when the laughter around him faded and he caught his reflection in the glass wall, he saw something else. The charm, the bravado, it all felt hollow. His wealth demanded attention, but it didn't demand respect. Not the kind that girl had spoken about. He brushed the thought aside, forcing a louder laugh to cover his discomfort. But deep down, he knew the crack had formed. Back in the garage, Imani finally lay down, staring up at the ceiling beams. Her father's words echoed in her mind, steady and haunting. Your hands can build more than machines. They can build respect. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to hold on. But tonight, respect felt farther away than ever. Still, buried deep beneath her doubt, a small ember smoldered. An ember that whispered she couldn't give up. Not yet. 3 days later, Imani sat by the chain-link fence near the private airport, her stomach aching from hunger. She had found nothing useful in the trash bins except a bruised apple, which she tucked away in her bag for later. Her eyes were heavy, but her ears were alert. She always listened for engines. Machines, unlike people, never lied. The sound of shouting carried across the tarmac. She stood, peering through the fence. At the hangar, Charles's jet was surrounded by engineers and crew. Their voices rose in panic. Pressure's fine, but it still won't hold. Check the secondary line. We're out of time. He needs to leave tonight. Imani's pulse quickened. The sputtering of the turbine echoed across the air, weak and uneven. She tilted her head, listening the way her father taught her. The rhythm was unmistakable. It wasn't fuel. It wasn't wiring. She knew the exact part that was choking the engine. Her first instinct was to back away. She could already hear Charles's voice mocking her, already feel the burn of humiliation crawling up her skin. Stay in your lane. She turned to leave, but a voice stopped her. You again, Rosa called, stepping out from the hangar shadows. The maintenance worker's arms were folded, but her eyes were kind. She had seen Imani lingering near the fence before. You heard it, didn't you? Imani froze. I don't know what you mean. Rosa raised an eyebrow. Don't play with me. You've got that look. The same one you had the other night. You know what's wrong. Imani shook her head, fear and doubt wrestling inside her. Even if I do, it doesn't matter. He'll laugh again. Everyone will. I can't go through that twice. Rosa stepped closer, lowering her voice. Listen, child. The first time they laughed because they could, because it was easy to dismiss you. But tonight they're desperate, and sometimes desperation forces people to hear the truth, even if they don't want to. Imani bit her lip. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. What if I'm wrong? Rosa's gaze softened. And what if you're right? What if this is the moment you prove it? Don't let one arrogant man silence the gift your father gave you. The words lit something inside Imani, something she thought had died the night of her humiliation. She remembered her father's voice, remembered the pride in his eyes whenever she solved a problem he couldn't. She remembered his hands guiding hers. She turned back toward the hangar, her legs trembling. Rosa placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Go on, she said gently. The first time you whispered. Maybe this time you shout. Imani drew a breath that felt like it carried her whole life. She walked through the gate, her sneakers scuffing against the smooth floor of the hangar. Charles noticed her immediately. His face twisted into disbelief, then irritation. Not you again, he snapped, his voice loud enough to turn every head. Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough? The engineers smirked. Some of the investors chuckled under their breath. The memory of the first humiliation pressed hard against Imani's ribs. For a moment she almost turned and ran, but Rosa's words echoed. What if you're right? Imani lifted her chin, forcing her voice to carry. I know what's wrong with your jet. And I can fix it. The hangar fell silent. Even the hum of machines seemed to pause. Charles laughed, a short, sharp sound. You really don't learn, do you? You're a homeless girl with dirty hands. Why should anyone here believe you? Imani's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. Because last time I told you exactly what was wrong. And I was right. A murmur rippled through the room. Engineers glanced at each other, unease flickering across their faces. Investors shifted in their seats. Charles's pride battled with the reality around him. He wanted to dismiss her, to throw her out into the night. But the jet was grounded, and time was slipping through his fingers. He narrowed his eyes. Fine, you've got 5 minutes. If you fail, you walk out and never come back. Imani nodded, her throat dry. She stepped closer to the machine, its silver surface reflecting her thin frame. Her heart pounded, but her hands itched with certainty. This time she would not whisper. The hangar seemed to hold its breath as Imani stood before the silent jet. Rows of polished shoes and expensive suits formed a wall of skepticism behind her, their eyes fixed on the girl who had no right, in their world, to be here. But Imani didn't look at them. She placed her hand on the cool metal, closed her eyes and listened. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Engines talk, baby. You just have to listen. They'll tell you what's wrong if you respect them enough. She opened her eyes, clear and steady. It's the compressor valve, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It's jammed. The airflow is choked off. That's why it won't restart. One of the engineers scoffed. We already checked that. Imani shook her head. No, you looked at it, but you didn't listen to it. You can hear it in the stutter, in the way the turbine gasps before it dies. Her confidence startled even herself. For the first time, she didn't sound like a girl begging to be heard. She sounded like someone who knew. Charles stepped forward, his smile sharp with mockery. So what are you saying? That all of my experts, men trained at the best schools, are blind? And only you, a girl from the gutter, can see what they can't? Imani met his eyes. Her voice did not waver. Yes, the hangar went silent. The arrogance in Charles's smile faltered. Investors shifted uneasily. A few murmured, let her try. Others whispered doubts, but the pressure was mounting. Billions were at stake, and no one else had a solution. Charles turned, scanning the crowd. He wanted to laugh her out again, but desperation tied his hands. Finally, he snapped, fine, prove it. But when you fail, everyone here will know exactly who you are, a fraud. Imani stepped to the engine. The engineers reluctantly moved aside, some rolling their eyes, others crossing their arms. Sweat dampened her palms, but her hands moved with certainty. She unfastened the panel, revealing the valve. There, she said, pointing at the residue clogging the part. See it? You missed it because you didn't look close enough. One engineer leaned in, his jaw tightening as he saw the truth. He glanced at Charles but said nothing. Imani grabbed a small tool from her backpack. The crowd murmured at the sight of her worn wrench set, tools old but cared for. The kind passed down with love, not bought with wealth. Her fingers worked quickly, clearing the blockage, resetting the valve with careful precision. She breathed steadily, every move guided by years of practice under her father's watchful eye. Finally, she stepped back. Try it now, Charles barked a laugh. On your word alone? Imani squared her shoulders. On the word of the girl you said should stay in her lane. For a moment, Charles's glare burned into her. But the investors were restless, and the pilot, caught between orders and pressure, climbed into the cockpit. Switches flipped, lights blinked. A moment of silence stretched painfully. Then with a deep roar, the engine thundered to life. Smooth, steady, powerful. Gasps erupted. Engineers stared wide-eyed. Investors clapped, some rising to their feet. The once silent hangar, filled with the sound of disbelief, turned to awe. Imani stood still, her chest rising and falling, the roar of the engine vibrating through her bones. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, her gift had spoken louder than prejudice. Rosa, watching from the sidelines, smiled through tears. That's my girl, she whispered. Charles's face hardened. He wanted to scowl, to spit, to laugh it off. But the truth blazed in front of him. The girl he mocked had saved him. Without her, his empire would have crumbled tonight. He stepped forward, his voice low and biting. You got lucky? Imani turned to face him, her eyes sharp with fire. No, I got skilled. I got prepared, And I got tired of people like you telling me I'm nothing. The words hit harder than the roar of the engine. For once, Charles had no reply. The crowd wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. Applause grew, filling the hangar. Some investors even approached Imani, shaking her hand, praising her insight. She felt her cheeks flush, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from pride. Charles stood frozen, watching as the center of attention shifted away from him. Stolen by a girl he had once laughed at, the balance of power had changed. And everyone knew it. The roar of the engine still hummed through the hangar, but the louder sound was the applause. Investors clapped, engineers exchanged stunned glances, and even the skeptical crew stood straighter, as if witnessing something undeniable. Imani stood in the center of it all, her worn hoodie hanging loose on her shoulders, her hands still smudged with grease. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of invisibility pressing her down. Instead, she felt taller, like her father's words had finally settled into her bones. Charles forced himself to approach, his pride wounded but not gone. His lips tightened into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You saved me a fortune tonight," he said, voice clipped. "And I pay those who save me." He pulled out a wallet thick with bills and held it out. Imani stared at the money for a moment. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, waiting to see her grab it, waiting for the story to end neatly with a billionaire's charity. But she didn't reach for it. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice calm and steady. Charles blinked. "What?" "I don't want charity," she repeated, her tone sharper this time. "I want respect." The hangar fell silent. Every eye turned back to her. The words, simple and clear, carried more weight than the engine she had just fixed. Rosa smiled proudly from the side, her arms folded. A few of the investors nodded, murmuring their agreement. One of them stepped forward. "She deserves more than respect," he said. "She deserves opportunity." By morning, the story had already begun to spread. Headlines whispered across news sites. Homeless black girl saves billionaire's jet. Pictures of Imani, grease on her hands and determination in her eyes, lit up screens. To the city that had once ignored her, she was no longer invisible. But for Imani, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the way the engineers now looked at her with reluctant admiration instead of scorn. It was in Rosa's proud nod. It was in the way her own heart, once heavy with shame, now beat with dignity. Offers came quickly. An apprenticeship at a prestigious engineering institute. Sponsorships from investors who wanted to be tied to her story. For the first time, doors that had always been locked began to open. Charles Harrington boarded his jet that night with his pride bruised. He tried to tell himself that she didn't matter, that she was just a lucky girl in the right place at the right time. But deep down, he knew the truth. She had exposed something in him, that all his wealth, all his arrogance, couldn't buy what she carried inside her: authentic skill, courage, and dignity. As dawn broke, Imani walked away from the hangar, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The city skyline stretched out before her, glowing gold in the sunrise. For years it had felt like a wall she could never climb. But now she saw it for what it truly was, a horizon waiting for her to claim. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, strong and steady. "Your hands can build more than machines, baby. They can build respect." And this time she believed him. The city returned to its rhythm the next day, jets lifting into the sky, cars rushing through polished streets, and people hurrying past one another as if nothing had changed. But for Imani, everything had. She was still the same girl with the same worn backpack, still without a home to return to. Yet the difference lay in how she carried herself. The night before had proved something no insult, no dismissal, no prejudice could erase. She mattered. Her voice mattered. Her hands, once ignored, had done what the world's wealthiest experts could not. For so long, society had pressed her into invisibility, convinced her that poverty and race were chains she could never break. Charles Harrington had embodied that belief, sneering down at her as if she were less than human. But engines didn't bow to arrogance. They bowed to skill. And skill had no color, no status, no title. Her story spread across the city, sparking whispers of inspiration in people who had been told they were less, people whose gifts had been overlooked. To them, Imani was more than a girl who fixed a billionaire's jet. She was proof that brilliance often lives in places no one bothers to look. As for Charles, he boarded his jet and flew away, but the image of Imani standing tall in that hangar haunted him. She had not only saved his empire that night, she had cracked the mirror of his arrogance. He could bury it in pride, hide it behind wealth, but deep down he knew she had shown him something money could never buy: respect earned, not demanded. Imani's journey was far from over. Prejudice would not vanish overnight. There would still be voices doubting her, still doors that resisted opening. But she carried something stronger now, the knowledge that she could rise again and again, no matter how many times the world tried to push her down. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Dignity is not given. It is claimed, and once claimed, it cannot be taken away.